Hi folks, I'm back. A quick video on negativity as it pertains to the conspiracy theory trap. Now, there's a lot of conspiratorial stuff going on right now. And part of our big Pluto through Aquarius transit that we're at the beginning of is going to keep revealing more and more wild stuff about what is going on behind the scenes. A lot of revelations about the Black Lodge, whether we use that term or not. We're talking about materialistic power structures that are old. They've been going on for a long time, all of those families and malicious people who are fundamentally driven by selfishness and greed, and they've got their fingertips in all kinds of pies in terms of mass media and banking and all of these very dense subject matters. So we're going to keep seeing revelations of this come out. The more and more public consciousness recognition of just the degree of sexual abuse that's going on, the child abuse, which is part of not just a perversion of people that are sick and twisted, but also part of a power structure, because it is such an evil act. When you abuse a child, there are like it's a mafia, basically, mafia bosses that they use that to, and it's all the Christian theme of the devil. They sort of will know what your weakness is. Now, oh, you want power and fame, we'll give it to you, but you've got to do this. You've got to abuse a child, and then we will own you forever because you've committed an evil. There's all kinds of these things going on now, and it's a very, very real reality that's going to, more crap is going to keep coming out about this. And it's part of moving into the Aquarian age, because we've got Uranus coming online, and so the activation of Libra, Uranus being the esoteric ruler of Libra, and law, sex, relationship, all of those warped aspects of power structures and the organization of substance as it's been going on for so long. What I want to talk about, though, is just being wary at the individual level of getting sucked into, in a very Piscean mass consciousness negativity way, which is kind of a nice theme too, because we've got the final regression back into Pisces with Saturn before it moves forward into Aries for another 28, 29 year cycle. Getting stuck in the negativity about that. I think sometimes one of the earlier experiences of awakening for people actually happens through a kind of a Plutonic conspiratorial route, where we start to get disillusioned about the kind of world that we're living in. We feel like something's really wrong. We're starting to sense the reality of love as a principle to some degree. And then we go, well, this is not what I'm seeing in the world around me. It's messed up that human beings are enslaved through money and taxes in the way that they are. It's all of these different things that go on, or people go through experiences where the system lets them down. And it's almost this disillusionment relative to the evil aspect of Saturn, Satan, as those concretized processes that are so much a part of our infrastructure. I don't think it's as much of a problem for my audience, but I just felt like it was worth talking about anyway, because people can get really trapped in this negativity. And it's a very insidious kind of consciousness to get trapped in, because it's kind of a half-truth. You're sort of it's the Plutonic revelation of the evil out there, but it can become a hook for people where it prevents there being a recognition of that personal responsibility in terms of transmuting your own evil and then stepping out into the love nature and just the simplicity and the practicality of that as a revelation. Of course, some people, their work may be in exposing the nefarious things. You look at a Julian Assange type person, that's someone doing their spiritual work. This is a heavy karma, getting imprisoned for what he did, but that's someone who's moved with the urge towards truth, and that just so happens to, in this incarnation for him, brought him into this sort of direct confrontation with the dweller as the governmental body, and he's got a strong Saturn opposition in his natal horoscope. So it's not that there isn't a spiritual purpose behind some people's orientation towards the exposing of the dark underbelly and revealing the conspiracies, but too many people get trapped there as a way to avoid personal responsibility for the transmutation of their own consciousness. And I think a really good example of this actually is David Icke. David Icke was the ex-footballer, and he became famous because he wrote all these books. And he was talking about, the evil world order and wanting to push us into a cashless society and the reptilians and all of this. And he was actually right about a lot of stuff that he was writing about back in the day, and a lot of that stuff has come to fruition. But it's a really difficult thing with him where he's hit on a lot of half-truths, but he's very clearly someone that has no real responsibility over his own consciousness. And so his entire mode of operating is really based in this reactionary and deeply angry and frustrated, frantic energy. And you see him in interviews. I've seen some ones that he's done more recently, and he's just not there. He just goes off and the other person can't get a word in. And it's a very scattered and fragmented way of being. And so for him, that's really a trap, where it's just this obsession with, you get immersed in the evil of the Maya. And while it is in reality, and so many of these things are going on, we also have to move with the spiritual responsibility to know that this is a consequence of the manifestation of the unreal or the untrue, right? The fear, the selfishness, these are the crystallized forms of consciousness, and the mass level evil that we see as results of that are still fundamentally extensions of an inverted energy. And when we understand evil as, yes, there are things that are evil, and people who have this wishy-washy, non-dual attitude where, nothing's really evil, it's all one. This is kind of an undifferentiated pre-trans state of being, and I find that quite foolish, because we do need to be able to look at something concretized and go, that's inverted and that is evil. But there is the non-dual revelation too, that if everything is an energy, then there is the reality of how we can transmute that. And of course, it starts with our own evil. It starts with transmuting our own selfishness, starts with working with our own minds to make ourselves actually useful in terms of how we can confront those limits and those evils, and what that actually looks like in terms of bringing something new into the picture. Because a big way in which the evil structures of the world is the planetary dweller, and all of the people who are hoarding the money and making it so that people have to pay for energy and electricity and all of this crap. With these, it's this very 12th housey theme actually of the hidden enemies and the inversion of the forces of life. Like, they're really trying to slow things down so that they can hold on to all of these resources. And that's where you get the translation into the sexual abuse too, because it's sort of it's a consuming of vital energy, that exploitation that goes on. All right, so that's kind of a side note. But once again, it really comes down to what is actually the practical solution to this. And I always think about the Buckminster Fuller quote, Buckminster Fuller being an initiate. I mention him all the time. He said, you don't overcome the system by fighting it, but you build a better one that makes the other one obsolete. And that's, I think, true in most of the cases. Once again, it may be someone's spiritual mission, like the Julian Assange example, to bring out the exposure. That's all part of it. And again, Pluto through Aquarius is going to be a part of that picture also. So there is a certain purpose to some people going into battles or interfacing with that planetary dweller in a much more personal way. But there's still just the reality of you moving with that love principle and being in allegiance to your own spiritual life, and that being the fundamental force that's going to save, because it is the savior force, that energy. So someone like David Icke, he's not in relationship to his own saving principle. He's not working with that energy which would free him from the influences of evil. And because he's getting so caught up in the crystallized manifestation, which at a deeper level is fundamentally illusory, it becomes that kind of, where you get the crazy conspiracy theorist types. And they do exist, of course. People point the finger and call very reasonable people asking very basic and truthful questions about dodgy shit crazy conspiracy theorists. But there is a portion of those types of people who are nutty, and they are like, it's just... and it is an excuse. And people I've known like that personally, I often see this interesting manifestation psychologically of that through their own negative father complex, which is kind of that, like, they are sort of in battle with that nefarious Saturnian force which is after them, or And I knew someone who went into a psychosis, actually, who, it was really psychotic. They were thinking that the government was out to get them because they were into crypto, and it was quite delusional. And I got rejected by the Uber. They're like hacking into my accounts. It was really, it was a psychotic kind of delusion. But that's what's going on psychologically. It's a sort of, it's a twisting of the reality of inverted forces where it just drives the person mad. So this is something we have to be very careful of. If we're getting sucked into, also, this is actually what I was going to say before, part of the way these people, the nefarious underbelly people work is by absorbing your psychic energy. That's where I digress talking about sex and the way that there's an absorption of psychic energy. But you feeding into that just with the constant, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this, can't believe they're doing this. That is serving them, because you're wasting your psychic life force just like reinforcing the reality of that. And unless you are someone like an Assange type person where you're actually practically and under a kind of sound mind working to flush out some of the reality of those influences through some kind of exposing journey or whatever. Unless you're one of those people, it's just a form of astral distortion. It's keeping you in fear, it's keeping you in fragmentation, and it's keeping you out of alignment of what really needs to happen, which is an aligning with the truth, knowing what the truth is at a subjective level of consciousness, because you have to really come to know that in yourself. It's a repatterning yourself first, and then stabilizing yourself out. It's like following our videos on the 3 crosses, so stabilizing out upon the fixed cross, and then you can come out into the world and actually at least be useful in your energies. And whatever the field of service may be, it may be healing, it may be education, it may be government, it may be law, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But that's how we join the ranks of the white brotherhood, if we were to use the esoteric language. And that's what's going to, across time, wane out the influences of the dark brotherhood and of the shadowy nefariousness that's going on behind the scenes. So this is just a quick one. I just was thinking about it in terms of kind of reflecting on some of these Saturn and Pisces themes and coming back and looking at my own, the ways in which that transit for me, because it was very difficult for me and my family. We were drowning in substance, and really not that it was showing up with a conspiratorial edge, but just in terms of the subjective experience of really drowning in the waters and how difficult that was, and not being able to access consciousness during that time in a way where I had always been able to before. So this was just fresh on my mind, and I wanted to jump in and talk about that. So just be careful. Once again, I don't believe most of my audience kind of fall into that line of thinking, but you want to be mindful about the power of negativity and of fear and those sorts of distressing energies that we can get pulled into. And just always bringing it back to that centralizing force, and knowing it's a meditative ability, mystical ability, to be able to rest into what is true and be able to lean back onto the spiritual reality that all that is good and true will come eventually to be once again, because that is the truth. The only thing that can happen is a slowing down of that evolutionary process and a temporary retardation of that, which is what the dark forces do and how it operates. But that's the only thing they can do. They will never win in the long run. So there's a kind of peaceful brilliancy to that if we can learn to just, not everything is about us having to, shout it down from the hilltops. Okay, that's all. I'll see you soon, guys.